The early morning silence was broken only by the muffled sound of tires sliding on the asphalt. My eyes were fixed on the window, my heart racing with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. There she was, walking out the front door, her hair disheveled and a coat thrown hastily over her shoulders. At his side, a man. Not a friend, not a relative, but someone she tried to hide with quick gestures and furtive glances. They didn't see me. My shadow was hidden in the darkness of the car parked on the corner. My mind screamed questions I didn't want to answer. How long had this been going on? Was every smile, every "I love you" I heard in the last few months real or just a mask to disguise this betrayal? The cold of the night seemed to invade my chest, but it wasn't the temperature that froze my body. It was the shock, the lump in the throat that prevented any words from coming out. When she opened his car door and got in, I felt like I was being kicked out of my own life. The vehicle's engine roared low, and they disappeared around the corner. I went home, but I didn't go in. My hands shook as I held the door key. The home we built together, every detail hand-picked, now seemed like an empty setting, a lie. The memories came like punches, the happy moments, the promises whispered on sleepless nights, the plans for the future. All of it now felt like dust, something she had deliberately stepped on. My breathing was heavy. What should I do? Confront her immediately or wait for an explanation that I knew would be an elaborate lie? Anger began to take the place of pain, but with it came a dark calm. This ends here, I thought. I wouldn't be a fool anymore, I wouldn't let her control me. I was decided. The morning would bring more than answers, it would bring the end of a life that now seemed as fake to me as the smile she wore. The sun hadn't yet risen when I saw her enter the front door again. Her gaze was uneasy, but she tried to hide it. "Are you awake?" he asked in a muffled voice, his eyes avoiding mine. I didn't respond. I just watched her as she placed her bag on the table, her nervous gestures betraying what she was trying to hide. "I needed air," she said, the lie so obvious it almost made me feel sick. "Air?" My voice finally broke the silence. She stopped, turned slowly, and for the first time our eyes met. She knew. I knew I had seen it. Discomfort passed across her face like a shadow, but in a matter of seconds, she was lifting the mask again. Yes, I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk. I laughed, but not with joy. It was the kind of bitter laugh, the sound of someone who could no longer believe in anything. Go for a walk at 3 in the morning? With him? His eyes widened for a moment, but then returned to the coldness I no longer recognized. I don't know what you're talking about. Her shamelessness was like a slap in the face, but this was no time to explode. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I approached, and she took a step back, as if my gaze were a weight she couldn't bear. I saw you. I saw both of them. I know. She tried to react, tried to speak, but the words came out disjointed, meaningless. Her mask was finally starting to slip. It's not what you think. She began, but I raised my hand to silence her. Don't tell me what to think. Don't tell me it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that you still love me. I've heard those excuses before, and I won't hear them again. There was a moment of silence between us, so thick it seemed to choke the air in the room. She finally sat up, shoulders slumped, and murmured, "I'm sorry." The words sounded empty. I knew she didn't feel remorse for what she did, but for the fact that she was caught. And it was at that moment that I made my decision. Throughout the day, as she moved around the house trying to pretend normalcy, I was planning my next move. It wouldn't just be a divorce. It would not be a simple and peaceful end. It would be an awakening. I would not be the victim in this story. No more. What she didn't know was that, in the midst of the pain, something inside me began to change. That betrayal, which should have broken me, was, in some way, rebuilding me. I knew the full truth still needed to be revealed, not just to me, but to everyone around us. And as I watched her reflection move through the house, not knowing what would come next, a cold smile crossed my face. What was about to happen would change our lives forever. And deep down, I knew she wasn't ready for this. Welcome to the channel. Here, we make it clear, we do not support, nor tolerate, any form of betrayal. All stories presented are fictional, created to show the devastating impact that disloyalty can have on people's lives. Get ready, because the story you are about to hear is intense, full of twists and turns and will leave you breathless. Fasten your seatbelts and good story. Lucas was the type of man who carried an admirable serenity, which made him a welcoming and stable presence. He did not claim to be the most ambitious or the most extravagant, but he was dedicated, both at work and in his marriage to Clara. He worked as an architect, and his days were often filled with drawing boards, calculations and precise drawings that translated dreams into realities. At home, however, he liked to slow down. Clara, on the other hand, was vibrant, full of life and intensity. Her smile had a particular way of lighting up the room, and she knew it. He worked as an interior designer, which meant that their professions frequently overlapped, something they believed was one of the foundations of their connection. The home they shared reflected their complementary personalities. Lucas was responsible for the solid structure, the clean lines, the functionality of each room. Clara, in turn, transformed common spaces into environments full of life, full of color, texture and small details that seemed to tell stories. This was where they spent the last 7 years of their marriage, shaping what should be a perfect home. Still, no matter how harmonious the surface, small details began to crumble into the cracks of everyday life. Lucas was not blind to the subtle changes in Clara's behavior. His silences were longer, his answers shorter, and there was something in the way his eyes seemed to search for something he couldn't offer. He blamed work. Both were overwhelmed with projects, deadlines, and demanding clients. I thought maybe they were just phases, like others they had already faced. After all, no long relationship is immune to moments of distance. But this distance felt different, colder, more concrete. Clara, in turn, also noticed the separation. She felt stuck in a routine that no longer challenged her. The days followed the same rhythm, the conversations with Lucas were predictable, and she yearned for something she couldn't even name. This made her look for new circles of friends, new inspirations, new experiences that would revive the shine she felt she had lost. In her heart, she knew she loved Lucas, but there was a restlessness in her soul that couldn't be ignored. They still had happy moments, of course. Quiet dinners on the balcony, memories shared while looking through old photo albums, nights where they laughed at lame jokes and spent time together on the couch. But the frequency of these moments was decreasing. It was as if they were both struggling to hold on to something that was slipping through their fingers, not knowing exactly what was falling apart. Their closest friends, although they rarely mentioned anything directly, noticed that the couple's radiance was no longer the same. Some blamed the workload, others believed it was just the natural course of time in a relationship. However, no one dared to ask or comment on what was evident to anyone who looked closely. Clara began to become more deeply involved with a group of co-workers, participating in meetings that often extended beyond working hours. Lucas, on the other hand, preferred the usual routine, leaving work and going straight home. He believed that Clara needed this space, new interactions, something that, deep down, bothered him, but that he was unable to verbalize. He felt he had no right to arrest his wife. After all, he loved seeing her happy, even if he wasn't entirely sure what made her smile lately. On weekends, the disconnect seemed more evident. While Lucas sought moments of tranquility, Clara became increasingly active outside the home, organizing meetings, saying they were important to strengthen connections at work. He supported her, even if there was a twinge of discomfort in his chest. This discomfort, however, was buried under the justification that true love required trust and space. There was one room in particular in the house that symbolized the life they built together, the studio. There, Clara worked on her more elaborate projects, while Lucas brought his drawings and ideas to share. It was a space for creative exchanges, laughter and complicity. But lately, Clara preferred to work outside, in cafes or at the company office. The studio seemed empty, like a reflection of what was happening between them. Lucas began to avoid going in there, feeling like something was being missed. Small signs were easy to ignore at first. Her phone vibrating more than usual. Messages that Clara read quickly and closed with a discreet touch. New clothes that appeared without explanation, although she always had a convincing excuse. Lucas was fully aware of these things, but he repressed any urge to confront her. Not because he was afraid of what he might hear, but because he still didn't know if he wanted to face what was beginning to form in his mind. Clara, on the other hand, was also aware of the change in Lucas's attitude. He seemed more introspective, more silent, as if he were trapped in a cycle of thoughts that she wasn't part of. This left her torn between guilt and relief. Guilty that she felt like she was moving away from someone who was unquestionably good for her, but relieved that he might not notice the nuances of what was happening inside her. Despite everything, they remained a couple to the outside world. At dinners with friends or family gatherings, the image was impeccable. Clara laughed and held Lucas' hand. He looked at her with admiration and affection. Neither of them knew for sure whether they were keeping up this facade for others or for themselves. Maybe a little of both. Yet there was something undeniable in the way they began to avoid certain conversations, certain looks. As if they knew, instinctively, that something was lurking, something that could change everything. Lucas tried to convince himself that it was just a phase, that all couples went through ups and downs. Clara, on the other hand, delved deeper and deeper into her concerns, believing that it was just a reflection of her own personal dissatisfaction. As the routine continued, the silent tension between them grew thicker. There were moments of genuine closeness, true, but they were like brief flickers of a flame that threatened to go out. And both, although in different ways, began to feel the weight of a choice they had not yet made. Deep down, Clara and Lucas were trapped between hope and fear. The hope that, somehow, everything would go back to the way it was before, and the fear that it would be too late. But destiny, relentless and full of twists, was about to enter the scene, and nothing would be the same as before. The days went on like a drawn-out, mechanical march, while Lucas and Clara navigated a coexistence that seemed like a silent spectacle, where they both knew something was wrong, but no one dared pull the curtain. Lucas had a growing feeling that something was out of place, but rationality always came to stifle his instincts. He justified Clara's changes as the result of stress or new friendships, but a part of him knew that this didn't explain the restlessness that was lodged deep in his chest. It was like a shadow, always present, but difficult to identify. Clara, on the other hand, found more and more excuses to be away from home. The work routine seemed to consume more than just his time, it also consumed his attention and thoughts. She told herself it was just a phase, that her need to be outside had nothing to do with Lucas, but with the monotony that seemed to encompass everything. However, every time I looked at him, I felt a greater weight, a guilt that I didn't know how to deal with. The little lies he told to justify his schedule began to pile up like rocks at the bottom of a lake, making his steps heavier every day. Lucas began to observe more. It wasn't something conscious at first, but a series of small details that made you stop and think. The messages Clara received always seemed to arrive at the strangest moments, and she never left her cell phone in sight for long. When he left, there was a kind of urgency in his expression, as if he needed to escape before something was discovered. He also began to notice how her eyes avoided his, as if staring at each other for a long time might reveal more than they were both prepared to deal with. And that worried him. One night, as Clara said she had a late meeting with coworkers, Lucas decided he could no longer ignore what he was feeling. The restlessness he had been trying to suppress finally became unbearable. He left the house minutes after her, but instead of heading to the bar where he usually met friends, he drove downtown, close to Clara's office. He didn't know what he expected to find, but the discomfort in his mind demanded answers. When he parked in front of the building, he noticed that the lights were off. No movement, no sign of life. He waited for a while, trying to convince himself that maybe she was somewhere else related to work. But then he saw her, leaving a nearby cafe. I wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, and Clara was smiling in a way that Lucas hadn't seen in a long time. An easy, natural smile that didn't seem forced. He remained in the car, unable to move. The two stopped next to a car, and Lucas saw the man place his hand on her waist, casually, as if that gesture was already familiar. Clara didn't back down. On the contrary, she looked comfortable. And then, the inevitable happened. They got into the car together, and the image of them disappearing around the corner was like a blow that Lucas hadn't expected. Lucas returned home, but didn't go in. He sat in the car, with his hands gripping the steering wheel. The pain was almost physical, a tightness in his chest that seemed to suffocate him. He tried to organize his thoughts, but all he could remember was that man's touch on Clara's waist, her smile, the complicity in his gestures. Why was she doing this? The question echoed in his mind, but there was no answer. He knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen, but at the same time he didn't know how to confront her. Anger was mixed with sadness, and he felt overwhelmed by a feeling of helplessness. When Clara returned home later, Lucas was in the kitchen, pretending to prepare something to eat. She entered with an expression he couldn't decipher. It was a mix of nervousness and relief, as if she was relieved to find him there, but at the same time carrying the weight of something she didn't want to share. He watched her in silence, trying to measure every movement, every word. Clara started talking about the job, mentioning generic details that he knew were fabricated. Lucas just nodded, pretending to listen, but inside his mind was boiling. That night he barely slept. The images from the night kept coming back, and he tried to put together a scenario that made sense. Maybe it was just a coworker. Maybe he was exaggerating. But deep down, Lucas knew he wasn't. Something was being hidden from him, something that could change everything he believed about Clara and their relationship. He knew he needed more answers, but he feared what he might find. The following days were an endurance test for Lucas. He tried to act normal, but doubt consumed every part of his being. Clara continued to leave with the same frequency, and Lucas began to notice a pattern. Departures always took place on the same days, at the same times. He decided he needed to act. One night, after Clara left, he followed her. It wasn't something he wanted to do, but he felt he had no other choice. She went to an elegant restaurant in the center, where she entered alone, but was soon accompanied by the same man. Lucas parked across the street, watching as they laughed and talked, as if they were a couple. He watched as the man held her hand on the table, and Clara didn't flinch. When the two left the restaurant and got into the same car, Lucas followed them to a nearby hotel. He stopped the car some distance away, watching as they got in together. The emptiness he felt was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as if his entire life had been undone in a matter of minutes. He stayed in the car for a long time, unable to move, think or react. Just looking at the hotel entrance, as if expecting Clara to run out to deny everything, to say that it was all a misunderstanding. But she didn't leave. And Lucas knew that his life would never be the same. He knew he needed to confront her, but not tonight. He needed time to think, to understand how to deal with the betrayal that was now undeniable. As he drove home, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, pain, disappointment. And, in the midst of all this, an insistent question that wouldn't leave him alone: why? The answer, however, was closer than he imagined. The night seemed to drag on endlessly as Lucas remained sitting on the living room sofa, the sound of the soft rain against the windows being his only company. Clara hadn't returned yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. His mind was in a silent battle, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed while at the same time gathering strength for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. The weight of the betrayal was crushing, but there was something more. Something in the way Clara had been behaving, in the lies she told so easily, something that he still couldn't name, but that seemed even deeper and more destructive. The sound of the key turning in the lock broke the silence. Lucas remained motionless as Clara entered, her steps hesitant, as if she already felt the tension in the air. She saw him sitting there, his eyes fixed on her in a way that made her stop in the middle of the hallway. For a moment, the silence between them was almost palpable, charged with an energy that seemed ready to explode. Clara took a deep breath and tried to smile, but Lucas's expression didn't change. He stood up slowly, crossing his arms as he watched her, as if trying to decipher her every move. "It's been a long day," Clara began, her voice weaker than she intended. "The meeting went on longer than I expected." She placed her bag on the kitchen counter, not having the courage to face him directly. Lucas took a step forward, the anger and pain struggling to express itself in words. "A meeting," he repeated, his tone icy. "Is that what you call it?" She stopped, finally looking up at him, her expression wavering between surprise and fear. "What are you talking about?" He tried, but his voice betrayed insecurity. Lucas took a few more steps forward, the distance between them decreasing, but the emotional gulf was palpable. "I saw you, Clara. I saw you with him. In the restaurant. In the hotel." His words came quickly, sharply, and Clara's reaction was immediate. Shock spread across his face, followed by an unsuccessful attempt to regain control. "Lucas, it's not what you think." She began, but he cut her off, his voice rising. "Don't you dare tell me what to think. Not after everything I've seen. Not after everything you've done." Clara took a step back, her hands shaking as she tried to find an explanation that could lessen the impact. But Lucas wasn't willing to listen. He began to walk around the room, as if the movement helped organize his whirlwind of thoughts. "I wonder how long this has been going on. Weeks? Months? Maybe years? And here I was, thinking we were just going through a rough patch, that you needed space. But no, that wasn't it, was it?" He stopped, turning to her, his eyes filled with a pain Clara couldn't bear. She tried to speak again, but he raised his hand, silencing her. "I trusted you, Clara. I built a life with you, I gave everything I had. And what did you do with it? You threw it away, as if nothing mattered." His voice began to crack, the weight of the words bringing tears to his eyes, but he blinked quickly, refusing to show any weakness. Clara finally found the courage to speak, even though her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. I don't know what to say other than that. I'm so sorry." He laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that made her shudder. "Apologies? Is that all you have? Are you sorry? Don't you think you deserve more than that? An explanation, perhaps? Or at least the truth?" She hesitated, the internal struggle evident in her expression. For a moment, it looked like she might say something, but then she lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. Lucas shook his head, frustrated, and walked to the window, looking at the darkness outside. "I can't go on like this, Clara. Not after this. There's no way." The silence that followed was unbearable. Clara knew she needed to say something, but every word felt inadequate. Then, as if finally giving in to the inevitability of the situation, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Lucas, there's something you need to know." He turned slowly, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Ah, now you want to talk. After everything, now you decide it's time to be honest. Well then, Clara. I'm listening." Clara struggled to find the words, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "I don't know how to start, but, it wasn't just a case. It's not just that." Lucas's expression hardened, his patience visibly waning. "So what is it, Clara? Say it at once." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if she needed to gather all the courage she had. He's not just someone I knew him before. Before the two of us. He was part of my past. Confusion washed over Lucas for a moment, but then something clicked. The pieces began to fall into place, and understanding came like a punch in the gut. Are you saying that he was always there? All this time? All our marriage? Clara shook her head quickly, tears streaming down her face. No, it wasn't like that. We had something before I met you. But it's over. At least I thought it was over. Lucas recoiled, as if her words were a physical blow. He felt the ground beneath his feet begin to give way, reality crumbling around him. And now? What changed? Why is he back? What did you hope to gain from this, Clara? She sobbed, unable to contain her emotions. I don't know, Lucas. I don't know. I was confused, and he showed up, saying things that made me question everything. I don't know what I was thinking. He shook his head, disbelief evident in his expression. Don't you know? Clara, you knew exactly what you were doing. You knew what you were risking. And yet, you chose to continue. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara knew she had lost more than just Lucas' trust. She had lost his respect, his admiration, everything that made their relationship special. And now, there was no turning back. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. He knew he needed answers, but he also knew he might never fully understand Clara's choices. And as the pain consumed him, he realized there was something more, something Clara hadn't yet told him. Something he couldn't ignore. Whatever it was, he needed to know. And this time, he wouldn't accept anything less than the truth. Lucas remained motionless, as if paralyzed by Clara's words. The silence in the room was so dense that it seemed to fill it completely, but inside there was a storm brewing. His eyes were fixed on her, trying to find something that made sense amidst the chaos she had just thrown at him. But all he saw was the woman he loved, now unrecognizable, shrouded in secrets that destroyed the foundation of what he believed to be his life. He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts, but each attempt was overwhelmed by the anger and pain that fought to manifest. Why did he come back, Clara? Lucas's voice broke the silence like a blade. Clara hesitated, her eyes glistening with tears she was trying to hold back. I don't know, Lucas. He just showed up. Said he needed to talk to me, that there were things he never got the chance to say. And I. She trailed off, her throat tight. Lucas took a step towards her, his expression filled with disbelief. And you thought it was a good idea to listen? You thought it was okay to open that door? After everything we've built? Clara tightened her arms around herself, as if trying to protect herself from the intensity of his words. I didn't plan this, Lucas. He said he wanted closure, that he needed one last talk. I thought it would be something harmless. Lucas laughed, but it was an empty sound, devoid of humor. Harmless. Sure. Because that's what people do when they're looking for closure, they show up years later and ruin someone's life. He began to pace the room, as if the movement helped contain the fury building within him. You say it was a mistake, but you know what's worse. It wasn't just your choices, Clara. It was your lack of consideration. You didn't think about me, you didn't think about what it would do to us. And now I'm here, trying to understand how I can even look at you without feeling this betrayal weighing on every word you say. Clara took a step towards him, tears finally escaping her eyes. Lucas, I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you in a way that I may never be able to repair, but I need you to understand. It wasn't because of a lack of love. It wasn't because I stopped loving you. He turned abruptly, staring at her with a mixture of pain and fury. So what was it, Clara? Convenience? Boredom? Or did you just want to know if you were still able to lie as well as before? She sobbed, guilt written in every line of her face. I was confused. He brought back memories, things I thought I was over. And I let myself go, Lucas. Not because I didn't love you, but because I couldn't deal with the questions he brought. Lucas narrowed his eyes, his face hardened. And what exactly did he bring back, Clara? What kind of questions would justify all of this? The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Clara knew that this was the moment of truth, that keeping more secrets would only make things even worse. She took a deep breath, her shoulders shaking under the weight of what she was about to reveal. He said he never should have left me. That he loved me, that he still loved me. And he asked me if I felt the same way. The confession hung in the air like a bomb ready to explode. Lucas felt a lump tighten in his throat, but he maintained a firm posture. And what did you answer? Clara lowered her gaze, unable to support the weight of Lucas's gaze. I said I didn't know. That I was confused. But, Lucas, that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. I just got lost in the middle of it all. He laughed again, but this time there was a deep sadness in his tone. Lost. You lost yourself. And in the process, you decided the best solution was to destroy everything we had. Lucas turned and walked towards the door, his heart heavy, but his mind resolved. Clara ran after him, desperate. Lucas, please listen to me. Don't go. I know I messed up, but we can get through this. We've been through so much together. Don't let this destroy us. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, without turning to face her. You already destroyed it, Clara. I'm just trying to understand what's left. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house, leaving Clara alone, overcome by a silence that seemed to swallow her whole. She fell to the ground, sobs racking her body as his words replayed in her mind. Lucas stepped out into the night, the cool air hitting his face, but no relief came. Each step felt heavier than the last, the pain in his chest only increasing. He drove aimlessly for hours, his mind flooding with thoughts and memories. The image of Clara with that man in the hotel, her words about the past, everything was mixed together in a whirlwind that left him on the verge of collapse. Finally, he stopped in front of a park he often visited when he needed clarity. Sitting on a bench under the stars, he allowed himself to feel the full extent of his pain, knowing that whatever came next would be irreversible. Clara, on the other hand, remained awake until dawn, waiting for Lucas to return. But the sound of the door never came, and its absence only intensified the weight of his choices. She knew she needed to do something, but doubt paralyzed her. What could I say or do to fix something that seemed so completely broken? And more importantly, did Lucas want it fixed? As morning approached, Clara realized that the battle for truth and redemption would not be easy, and perhaps she was already lost. Lucas, however, knew that the day would bring decisions he never imagined he would have to make. And in the back of his mind, a new question began to arise, one he could no longer ignore: what else was she hiding? The sun was starting to rise over the horizon when Lucas finally decided to head home. He hadn't slept. My head was pounding with so many questions, and the answers seemed further and further away. The conversation from the night before echoed in his mind, Clara's every word like a wound he couldn't stop reopening. He didn't know what to expect when he walked through the front door. Would Clara still be there? Would he have given up, run away? He felt torn between wanting answers and fearing that they would be even more painful than the truths he already knew. When he entered, the house was silent. Clara was sitting in the living room, her eyes fixed on a cup of cold coffee in her hands. It looked like she hadn't slept either. The deep circles under her eyes and her tired expression betrayed the weight of what she was carrying. Lucas hesitated at the entrance, but the tension in his body was evident. She looked up slowly, and when she saw him, something in her face lit up briefly before disappearing into a mix of relief and fear. "You're back," was all she could say, her voice shaking. Lucas closed the door behind him, but didn't respond immediately. He walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water and remained with his back to her for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, he turned around, his expression still as hard as the night before. "I needed to think," he said, his voice controlled but charged with an emotion he struggled to contain. Clara nodded slowly, as if understanding that he was still trying to process everything. The silence between them was suffocating, but Lucas finally decided to break it. "You need to be honest with me, Clara. I can't keep living like this, in doubt, expecting you to tell me what I already know or to hide what I fear. If there's something else I need to know, tell me now." Clara swallowed, her hands shaking as she placed the cup on the table. She knew she couldn't hide anything anymore. Lucas deserved to know everything, and deep down, she knew she was postponing the inevitable. "There's something you don't know, but you need to know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas felt his heart accelerate. He didn't know what he was about to hear, but the way Clara spoke made every muscle in his body tense. "He didn't just come back for me. He came back because there was something he thought you should know, something he said he couldn't keep to himself anymore." Lucas narrowed his eyes, anger and despair competing to take control of his emotions. "And what could that be, Clara? What else are you and he hiding from me?" She hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. Finally, she took a deep breath and faced him directly, tears beginning to stream down her face. "The time he was in my life before you wasn't as simple as I wanted to believe. When we broke up, it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because he decided to leave, leaving everything behind. But what he didn't I knew, and what I hid from everyone, including you, was that I was pregnant." The words hung in the air like a devastating blow, and Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He staggered a little, surprise and pain competing to overwhelm him. "Were you pregnant?" he asked, his voice hoarse, almost inaudible. Clara nodded, her face marked with guilt. "I lost the baby shortly after he left. I never told anyone, not him, not my family. It was something I thought I could bury, forget. But when he came back, he knew. I don't know how, but he knew. And he said he needed to talk to you, that you had a right to know." Lucas blinked, trying to process the information Clara had just dumped on him. "And what exactly should I know?" "That he's the kind of man who abandons a pregnant woman and then shows up years later to destroy her life. Or is there something else, Clara? Because, honestly, I don't know what anymore, think." She shook her head quickly, tears now falling freely. "He wants you to know that even though he doesn't know what happened, he regrets it. That he wants to make peace with the past." Lucas laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. "Making peace with the past. How noble. Meanwhile, he shows up, turns your life upside down, and destroys what we had. Is this what he calls redemption?" Clara lowered her gaze, unable to support the weight of Lucas' despair. "I'm not trying to defend what he did, Lucas. I just want you to understand the context. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know the truth." Lucas began to walk around the room again, trying to organize the thoughts that were swirling around him. "The truth. I don't know what that means anymore. Everything I thought was true about us seems like a lie now. And worst of all, you chose to hide it from me for years, until it all came to light, comes out in the worst possible way." Clara remained silent, knowing there was nothing she could say to ease what Lucas felt. Finally, he stopped and looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed infinite. "I don't know what to do with this, Clara. I don't know how to move forward knowing all of this. But most of all, I don't know if I can forgive what you did, both in the past and now." Clara felt the weight of those words like a punch in the stomach, but she knew she deserved every one of them. "I understand, Lucas. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth before it was too late." Lucas took a deep breath, feeling his anger begin to give way to an emptiness that was even more painful. He knew he needed time to process everything, but he also knew he couldn't stay in that house anymore, at that moment. "I need to leave," he said finally, his voice calmer but still filled with pain. "I need space to think." Clara just nodded, not trying to stop him this time. She knew she had lost more than she could bear, and now all that was left was to deal with the consequences of her choices. When Lucas left again, the sound of the door echoed through the house like a final sentence. Clara remained where she was, feeling that, even with all the truth exposed, the gulf between them was irreparable. And Lucas, as he walked under the cloudy sky, felt more lost than ever, knowing that the way back would be more difficult than anything he had ever faced before. The days that followed were a blur for Lucas. He had rented a small temporary apartment, an empty, soulless space that seemed to reflect his inner state. Clara's words still resonated in his mind, but there was no more room for anger. What remained was an overwhelming tiredness, a sense of loss that seemed irreparable. He spent hours sitting by the window, watching life go on outside, while inside him everything seemed at a standstill, trapped in a loop of pain and mistrust. He hadn't spoken to Clara since he left home. He didn't respond to his messages, he didn't return his calls. "I felt like I needed distance to decide what to do, but the distance only seemed to increase the emptiness." Clara, on the other hand, was still in the house the two had shared. Each room seemed a cruel reminder of what she had lost. She tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the loneliness was oppressive. Her nights were filled with thoughts of how everything could have been different, of how she had allowed her weakness to destroy something that, deep down, she knew she could never replace. "The messages I sent to Lucas were short, almost desperate, but he never responded. His silence was the cruelest punishment, a confirmation that, perhaps, he was determined never to return." It was only weeks later that they finally met again. Lucas had agreed to talk, but made it clear he wasn't ready to talk about reconciliation. He needed answers, a way to close the chapter that still kept him trapped. They met in a small, discreet cafe, away from prying eyes. When Clara arrived, she looked thinner, more tired. Lucas was no longer the same either, there was a hardness in his gaze that hadn't existed before. Clara began to speak, but this time, bluntly. She knew Lucas deserved to hear everything, and for once, she didn't try to smooth things over or justify his actions. He told her about the pain he had carried since losing the baby, about how he had buried that part of his life, believing he could move on without facing the truth. She admitted that when the past came back to the surface, she didn't know how to deal with it, she didn't know how to protect what was most important. His words were sincere, but Lucas remained silent, absorbing every detail. When she finished, Lucas finally spoke. His voice was firm, but there was a tone of resignation. "I think I always knew there was something you were hiding. I don't know if it would have changed anything if you had told me sooner, but I know this isn't something we can just erase. You destroyed the trust we had, Clara. And without this, there is no way to continue." Clara nodded, tears silently streaming down her face. She knew Lucas was right, and although the pain was unbearable, there was a strange relief in hearing the truth spoken out loud. "I know, Lucas. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope that, someday, you can find peace. That's all I want for you." Lucas didn't respond, he just nodded, feeling that there was finally closure to that part of his life. As Clara walked home, she felt something had changed inside her. The pain was still there, but now there was room for acceptance. She knew that she would need to rebuild her life, that the scars of what had happened would always be with her. He began to seek help, to face the demons he had carried for so long. "I knew the road would be long, but for the first time, I felt like I could find a new beginning." Lucas, in turn, began to reevaluate his priorities. He knew he needed to find a way to move forward, not only leaving Clara behind, but also the wound she had left in his soul. It was in a bookstore, while absently leafing through a book about architecture, that he met Anna. She was kind, with a smile that seemed to illuminate even the darkest corners of Lucas's heart. They started talking, and for the first time in months, he felt a spark of something he thought he had lost forever. Time passed, and Lucas and Anna began to build something new. It wasn't easy, the scars were still there, but together they found a way to heal. Clara, on the other hand, found purpose in helping others who were facing emotional challenges. She became a mental health advocate, sharing her story to inspire others to face their own traumas. Although there were still moments of sadness, she knew she was on the right path. In the end, everyone involved was transformed by what happened. Clara learned that choices have consequences, but also that redemption is possible, even if it comes in unexpected ways. Lucas discovered that pain doesn't have to be the end, but can be the beginning of something new. And together, yet apart, they showed that even in the most painful stories, there is room for growth and hope. Now it's your turn. What did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more impactful stories like this. Remember, here, we never support any type of betrayal, and our goal is to show how it can destroy lives. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.